I never told my daughter what I kept in a warehouse in the city center. When she married a gold digger, I made sure he'd never find the key. Before we dive into this wild tale, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss stories like this, trust me. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from all corners of the world. Now, let's get back to the moment everything changed. I'll never forget the day my phone rang with those words. "Madam, your son-in-law is here. He's got bolt cutters." My hands didn't even tremble as I set down my teacup. I'd been waiting 43 years for this moment. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer to think of it as justice, marinated in patience. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and this is the story of how I taught a gold digger the most expensive lesson of his miserable life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, which seemed fitting somehow. Tuesdays had always been significant in my life. I was born on a Tuesday, I married my late husband Harold on a Tuesday, and on a Tuesday, I made the decision that would define the rest of my daughter's life, though she didn't know it at the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began. 1979. Harold and I had just sold our manufacturing business for what was, at the time, an astronomical sum, $7.2 million. In today's money, you're looking at something north of $30 million. We were careful people, Harold and I. We didn't flash our wealth. We lived in the same modest 3-bedroom house we'd bought 20 years earlier. We drove sensible cars. We clipped coupons, for heaven's sake. But we had plans for that money. Big plans. Our daughter, Charlotte, was 16 then. Beautiful, brilliant, and heartbreakingly naive about the ways of the world. She had her mother's compassion and her father's brilliant mind, but she'd inherited neither of our cynicism. She saw the good in everyone, believed every sob story, trusted every smile. Harold and I looked at each other over dinner one night, and we both knew Charlotte would need protection from the world, especially from the kind of people who could smell money like sharks smell blood and water. So we made arrangements, quiet arrangements, legal arrangements, and most importantly, secret arrangements. We purchased a warehouse in the city center, not a small one either, 15,000 square feet of climate-controlled space in a building that looked completely unremarkable from the outside. The kind of place you'd walk past 1,000 times and never give a second glance. Perfect. Over the next 3 years, we filled that warehouse. Not with what you're thinking, though. Not with gold bars or cash or jewels. No, we filled it with something far more valuable. Legacy. Harold had always been a collector. Vintage cars, rare books, original artwork from emerging artists who later became masters, antique furniture, first edition comics, signed sports memorabilia, vintage wines, historical documents. He had an eye for value that was almost supernatural. If Harold Whitmore bought something, you could bet your last dollar it would be worth 10 times the price within a decade. By the time Harold passed away in 1986, that warehouse contained a collection worth approximately $43 million. Nobody knew about it except me and our estate attorney, a tight-lipped man named Albert Rosewood, who'd rather cut out his own tongue than reveal a client's secrets. Charlotte knew we'd had money from the business sale, of course, but she thought we'd spent most of it on investments that were tied up. She received a generous trust fund when she turned 21. Enough to live comfortably, but not so much that she'd never need to work. Harold and I wanted her to have purpose, to understand the value of earning your own way. The warehouse was meant to be her inheritance, her security blanket, the thing that would ensure she and her children and her children's children would never want for anything. But then she met Derek Ashford. I knew he was trouble the moment he walked through my door. It was a Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1991. Charlotte brought him home for lunch, her face absolutely glowing with what she thought was love. I saw something else entirely. I saw the way his eyes cataloged everything in my modest living room, calculating, assessing. I saw how his smile never quite reached his eyes. I saw the expensive watch on his wrist and the designer shoes on his feet, worn casually, as if to say, I have money. But I also saw the frayed collar on his shirt that he'd tried to hide with his jacket. Derek was handsome, I'll give him that. tall, dark-haired, with the kind of charm that comes naturally to con men and sociopaths. He said all the right things, complimented my cooking, asked about my late husband with what seemed like genuine interest, laughed at the right moments, touched Charlotte's hand with apparent tenderness. But I'd been around long enough to spot a performance when I saw one. I ran a background check. Don't look at me like that. Any mother worth her salt would do the same. Derek Ashford came from old money. Emphasis on old. His family had lost everything in the early 80s through a combination of bad investments and worse gambling habits. Derek himself had been engaged twice before, both times to women from wealthy families. Both engagements mysteriously broken off after a few months. He had no real career, just a series of business ventures that never seemed to pan out. He lived in an expensive apartment he could barely afford and drove a leased BMW he definitely couldn't. The man was a gold digger, pure and simple, and my daughter, my sweet trusting Charlotte, was absolutely besotted with him. I tried to warn her, gently at first. Take your time, sweetheart. There's no rush. But Derek had moved fast, as predators do. Within 3 months, he'd proposed. Within 6 months, they were planning a wedding. Charlotte was 29, successful in her own career as a pediatric surgeon, and she thought she'd found her partner for life. I could have told her about the warehouse then. Could have explained that she was already wealthy, beyond Derek's wildest dreams, and didn't need to marry anyone for security. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was a test. I wanted to see if Derek truly loved my daughter, or if he was just after what he thought was a modest inheritance from an old lady's estate. So I kept my mouth shut, and made different arrangements instead. I had the locks changed on the warehouse. I had a new security system installed, one that required not just a key, but a biometric scan. I updated my will with provisions that Derek could never have imagined, and I hired a new warehouse manager, a former military police officer named Thomas Chen, who I knew I could trust with my life, and more importantly, with my secrets. The wedding was beautiful, I'll admit that. Charlotte looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace gown. Derek played the part of the loving husband to perfection. I smiled and toasted and hugged my new son-in-law, all while knowing exactly what kind of man he really was. Call it intuition. Call it cynicism. Call it the wisdom that comes from 7 decades of watching people reveal themselves when they think no one's looking. The first few months seemed fine. Derek made a show of looking for work, though somehow nothing was ever quite right for him. Charlotte's salary as a surgeon was more than enough to support them both, and Derek seemed content to let her do exactly that. He joined an expensive gym, started playing golf at an exclusive country club, bought a new wardrobe on Charlotte's credit cards. Small things, but they added up. Then he started asking questions about me. Charlotte mentioned it casually over Sunday dinner at my house, about 8 months after the wedding. Derek was asking about Dad's business, she said. He wanted to know what happened to all the money from the sale. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart rate kicked up a notch. What did you tell him? Just what you always told me, that most of it went into investments in Dad's medical bills at the end. She shrugged, not noticing the way Derek's name on her lips made my jaw tighten. Why do you think he's asking? Why indeed? I knew exactly why. Derek had gone through Charlotte's trust fund faster than he'd anticipated. The house they'd bought needed renovations he insisted on. The cars he wanted to drive cost more than Charlotte's Volvo. The lifestyle he felt entitled to required more money than a pediatric surgeon's salary could provide, even a successful one. So now he was sniffing around for more, wondering if his elderly mother-in-law might be sitting on a hidden fortune. He was right, of course, just not in the way he thought. I started noticing other things after that. Derek would drop by my house unexpectedly, always with some excuse, bringing me flowers, checking if I needed help with yard work, offering to take me to doctor's appointments I didn't have. Each time those calculating eyes would sweep through my rooms, looking for something he couldn't quite name. Bank statements, maybe. Investment portfolios. Safety deposit box keys. Evidence of wealth I was hiding. He was smooth about it, I'll give him that. Always the dutiful son-in-law. Always concerned about his aging mother-in-law living alone. But I'd been playing chess while Derek was still learning checkers. Every time he visited, I made sure there was nothing to find. My financial documents stayed locked in Albert Rosewood's office. My modest bank statements showed exactly what I wanted them to show: a comfortable but unremarkable retirement income. Meanwhile, I watched Derek's frustration grow. He started having financial discussions with Charlotte, pressuring her to ask me about her inheritance. After all, wouldn't it be better if Charlotte had access to her father's estate now, while she could enjoy it? Shouldn't I be thinking about estate planning at my age? What was I waiting for? Charlotte, bless her heart, refused to ask. She'd been raised better than that. But I could see the seed of doubt Derek was planting. The subtle suggestions that maybe her mother was being selfish, holding on to money that rightfully belonged to Charlotte. It was masterful manipulation, really. Turn the daughter against the mother, get access to the funds, and probably leave Charlotte for a newer, wealthier model within a few years. Not on my watch. 2 years into the marriage, Derek's mask started slipping. He began staying out late. Charlotte found credit card bills for purchases she knew nothing about. Dinners at expensive restaurants she'd never been to. Hotel rooms charged to their joint account. When she confronted him, he had explanations ready. Business meetings, networking events, potential investors for his latest venture, which was always just about to take off, just needed a bit more capital, just required a bit more time. Charlotte came to me crying one night after a particularly bad fight. Derek had asked her to take out a loan against the house, $200,000 for what he called a sure-thing investment opportunity. She'd refused, and he'd exploded, calling her selfish and small-minded, saying she'd never understand what it took to build real wealth. I held my daughter while she sobbed and bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to tell her everything right then. Wanted to explain that she was already sitting on a fortune that would make Derek's investment opportunity look like pocket change. Wanted to reveal that her mother had been protecting her all along. Because Derek needed to reveal himself completely. Charlotte needed to see him for what he truly was, not because her mother told her, but because she discovered it herself. Only then would the lesson stick. Only then would she truly understand how to recognize a predator when she saw one. So, I dried her tears and told her to trust her instincts. I reminded her that she was strong and smart, and didn't need anyone else to validate her decisions. I didn't mention the warehouse. I didn't mention the $43 million, growing in value year by year. I just held my daughter and waited. Derek's desperation grew more obvious over the next year. He started making comments about my age, about how I should be enjoying my golden years, instead of hoarding assets. He volunteered to help me organize my affairs, to streamline my estate planning. He even suggested, with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes, that maybe I should consider moving into a retirement community where I'd be safer and more comfortable. What he meant, of course, was that I should sell my house and liquidate whatever assets he imagined I had, making them easier for him to eventually access. I played along just enough to keep him interested. I'd mention, vaguely, that yes, Harold had made some wise investments. I'd let slip that there were a few things stored away that might be valuable someday. I'd hint at documents that needed organizing, plans that needed finalizing, each breadcrumb carefully placed, leading him exactly where I wanted him to go. Thomas Chen, my warehouse manager, kept me updated on everything. The warehouse was secure, climate-controlled, and completely off anyone's radar. The contents had been carefully cataloged and appraised. That 1972 Ferrari Daytona alone was now worth over $700,000. The collection of original Andy Warhol prints had appreciated to over $2 million. The first edition Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman, was worth nearly $3 million by itself. The vintage wines, the rare books, the antique furniture, the original Picasso sketches, all of it growing in value, while Derek scrambled for scraps. But Derek was clever, I'll give him that. He knew he couldn't push too hard without arousing suspicion. So he changed tactics. He became the perfect son-in-law again, attentive, caring, helpful. He started volunteering at Charlotte's hospital charity events. He coached Little League on weekends. He brought me flowers every Sunday. He was rebuilding his image, constructing the persona of a man who truly loved his family and would never, ever be motivated by something as crass as money. And all the while, he was searching. I knew he was searching because Thomas started reporting unusual activity. Someone had been asking questions at the county records office about properties in my name. Someone had requested copies of Harold's death certificate and estate documents. Someone had even tried to access my medical records, though HIPAA laws had blocked that particular avenue. Derek was building a case, I realized. He was trying to determine my net worth, my assets, my vulnerabilities. He was preparing for the day when Charlotte would inherit, planning how to get control of whatever I left behind. He probably had divorce papers already drawn up, just waiting for the right moment. Get the inheritance, dump the wife, move on to the next mark. What Derek didn't know was that I'd been building my own case. Private investigators are cheap, but they're worth every penny when you need documentation. I had photos of Derek's lunch meetings with a 23-year-old cocktail waitress named Amber. I had records of the secret bank account he'd opened in the Cayman Islands. I had testimony from his golf buddies about his plans to cash out of his marriage once the old lady finally croaked. Charming, isn't it? The man my daughter had married, the man who shared her bed and her life, was literally waiting for me to die so he could steal her inheritance and abandon her. But I had one more card to play, one more piece of information that Derek had somehow missed in all his digging. The warehouse. The warehouse had remained completely off Derek's radar for one simple reason. It wasn't in my name. Harold had been smarter than that. When we purchased the property back in 1979, he'd set up a trust, something called a dynasty trust that could last for generations. The trust owned the warehouse. The trust owned the contents. And the trust had very specific instructions about who could access it and under what circumstances. I was the primary trustee, of course. Albert Rosewood was the successor trustee. Charlotte was named as the beneficiary. One of those conditions was that she had to be unmarried or married to someone who signed a very specific prenuptial agreement that Albert had drafted. An agreement that Derek, in his rush to marry Charlotte, had refused to sign. Charlotte had been hurt by his refusal at the time, though Derek had explained it away as a matter of principle. Real love doesn't need contracts, he'd said, all wounded dignity and righteous indignation. Don't you trust me? She'd trusted him. I hadn't. And that refusal to sign the prenup had been the final piece of evidence I needed to confirm what I already knew about Derek Ashford. So the warehouse remained invisible to him. No property records in my name. No tax documents he could access. No paper trail leading from me to that unmarked building in the city center where a fortune sat waiting. It was the perfect secret, and I'd kept it for over 40 years. Thomas Chen had been with me for 15 years by the time Derek came into the picture. Former Marine, former MP, current head of security for a building that supposedly stored old furniture and family heirlooms. That's what the insurance documents said anyway. Thomas knew better. He'd helped me catalog every item, arrange every piece, maintain the perfect climate control that kept paintings from degrading and wine from spoiling. Thomas was also the one who installed the additional security measures after Derek married Charlotte. Cameras in every corner, motion sensors, a silent alarm that went directly to his phone and mine. If anyone even breathed near that warehouse without authorization, we'd know about it. You really think you'll try something? Thomas had asked me when we were setting up the new system. It's just a matter of when. I'd been right, though it took longer than I expected. 3 years into the marriage, Derek's situation became increasingly desperate. His latest business venture had collapsed, leaving him with significant debts. Charlotte had discovered another affair, this one with a wealthy widow Derek had met at the country club. They'd separated, though not divorced yet. Charlotte was living with me while she figured out her next steps. And Derek was panicking. His meal ticket was slipping away. Charlotte had cut off his access to her accounts. She'd removed his name from the house deed. She'd even hired a divorce attorney, a shark of a woman, who was already drawing up papers that would leave Derek with exactly nothing. He needed a windfall, and he needed it fast, which meant he needed to find whatever assets I was hiding. And somehow, someway, he'd figured out about the warehouse. Maybe he'd hired his own private investigator, who was better than I gave him credit for. Maybe he'd sweet-talked some clerk at the records office into searching under Harold's name instead of mine. Maybe it was just dumb luck, overhearing a conversation or seeing a document that led him in the right direction. However it happened, Derek found out about the warehouse 3 weeks before the divorce was set to be finalized. Thomas called me on a Thursday afternoon with the news. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've got a problem. Someone's been watching the building. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street for the last 3 days. Different times, different durations, but always watching." "Description of the driver?" I asked, though I already knew. "Tall, dark hair, expensive suit. Looks like the photos you showed me of your son-in-law." "He's not my son-in-law much longer," I said. "Has he approached the building?" "But, Mrs. Whitmore, if he knows what's in here, then he'll try to get access," I finished. "Which he can't do legally, which means—" "He'll try something illegal," Thomas said grimly. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet. Just watch him. Document everything. I want to know the moment he makes a move." I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years. Part of me had hoped Derek would surprise me, would prove himself to be better than I thought he was. But a larger part of me, the part that had survived 70 years by trusting my instincts, knew exactly how this would play out. Derek would try to break in. He'd try to steal whatever he could from what he probably thought was just a storage unit full of old furniture. He'd get caught, of course. Thomas would make sure of that. And then Derek would learn exactly what kind of family he'd tried to con. The waiting was the hardest part. Derek watched the warehouse for 5 more days. I watched Derek through Thomas's reports and the security cameras we'd positioned outside the building. Charlotte, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding, focused on her divorce proceedings and her work at the hospital. "Mom, my lawyer says this should be straightforward," she told me over dinner one night. "Derek can't claim any of my trust fund because of how Dad set it up. He won't get the house. He'll basically walk away with whatever he brought into the marriage, which is pretty much nothing." "Good," I said, patting her hand. "You deserve better than him, sweetheart." "I should have listened to you from the start," she said quietly. "You knew, didn't you, that he was only after money?" "I suspected," I admitted. "But you needed to figure it out yourself. If I'd just told you, you might have resented me. You might have thought I was trying to control your life." "I wouldn't have believed you anyway," Charlotte said with a sad smile. "I was so in love with who I thought he was. It took me 3 years to see who he really is." "Better 3 years than 30, I said. "And Charlotte, you're gonna be just fine. Better than fine." She squeezed my hand, not knowing how true those words were. Not knowing that she was about to become one of the wealthiest women in the state. Not knowing that her mother had been playing the longest game of chess imaginable, all to protect her from exactly this kind of predator. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week before the divorce was set to be finalized. I was at home, having tea in my garden, enjoying the spring sunshine. My phone rang, and Thomas's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. "He's here." "Derek?" "Yes, ma'am. He just pulled up in a rental truck." "And Mrs. Whitmore?" "He's got bolt cutters." I felt a smile spread across my face. After 3 years of waiting, watching, and planning, Derek had made his move, and it was exactly as illegal and desperate as I'd hoped it would be. "Has he accessed the building yet?" "He's trying to cut the lock on the loading dock door right now. Should I stop him?" "Not yet," I said calmly, setting down my teacup. "Let him get inside. Let him see what's there. But Thomas, make sure you're recording everything. Every second. I want it all documented." "Already on it. Every camera in the place is running." "And Mrs. Whitmore?" "I've already called the police. They're on their way. ETA 10 minutes. "Perfect. I'll be there in 15. This is going to be very interesting." I hung up and looked at my phone for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Then, I dialed Charlotte's number. "Hi, Mom," she answered. "What's up?" "Charlotte, sweetheart, I need you to meet me somewhere. Something I should have shown you a long time ago." "What is it? Is everything okay? You sound strange." "Everything is about to be much better than okay," I said. "I'll text you the address. Come as quickly as you can. And Charlotte, trust me, you're going to want to see this." I could hear the concern in her voice as she agreed. I texted her the warehouse address, then I grabbed my purse and my car keys. My hands were steady as I locked up the house and got into my sensible sedan. No trembling, no fear, no second thoughts. Just satisfaction. Pure, cold satisfaction. Derek Ashford had finally made the mistake I'd been waiting for him to make. And now, everyone would see him for exactly what he was. The drive to the warehouse took exactly 17 minutes. I didn't speed, didn't rush. There was no need. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd planned. Thomas had called again to confirm Derek was inside, and the police were already en route. Charlotte had texted that she was on her way, confused but trusting me enough to drop everything and come. As I pulled up to the warehouse district, I could see Derek's rental truck parked illegally by the loading dock, the back doors flung open in his haste. The bolt cutters lay on the ground where he'd dropped them after cutting through the exterior lock. So confident, so certain he'd found his golden ticket. Thomas met me at the side entrance, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "He's in the main storage area," he said quietly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you should have seen his face when he got through the interior door and saw what was inside." "I can only imagine," I said. "The police?" 2 minutes out. I told them we had an active break-in, possible theft in progress. They're sending multiple units. "And the cameras?" "We've got him on film cutting the lock, breaking and entering, and now attempting to load items into his truck. He's already grabbed one of the smaller paintings and a box of what he probably thinks are valuable antiques." I smiled. The painting he'd grabbed was an original Rothko, worth approximately $4 million. The antiques were Fabergé eggs, collectively worth another $6 million. Derek had no idea he was committing what would amount to a $10 million heist. "Let's go inside," I said. "I want to see this for myself." Thomas led me through the secure entrance, past the biometric scanner that Derek had bypassed by simply breaking a window, and into the main warehouse space. And there he was. Derek Ashford, my soon-to-be ex-son-in-law, stood in the center of $43 million worth of carefully curated treasures, his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. He'd frozen in the act of reaching for what appeared to be a Tiffany lamp, his eyes darting from the vintage Ferraris to the walls lined with original artwork to the climate-controlled wine cellar visible through a glass partition. "Hello, Derek," I said pleasantly. He spun around so fast he nearly knocked over a display of rare coins. His face went through several shades of color, settling on a pale gray that matched his suddenly sweaty complexion. "Margaret, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, walking calmly into the space, Thomas a solid presence at my back. "Please, do explain what you're doing in my private property with bolt cutters and a rental truck. I'm fascinated to hear your reasoning." He tried to rally, to summon that charm that had fooled my daughter for 3 years. "I was worried about you. Charlotte mentioned you had some things in storage, and I thought I'd help you organize them. As a surprise. You know, before the divorce is final, as a gesture of goodwill." "Breaking and entering, as a gesture of goodwill," I repeated. "How thoughtful. And the bolt cutters?" "The lock was stuck. I was just trying to help. By destroying private property. I didn't know it was yours. I thought maybe it was Charlotte's, or mine, which would mean after the divorce you'd have no legal right to any of it whatsoever." I took a step closer, and Derek instinctively backed up. "Did you really think I was stupid, Derek? Did you really think I didn't know exactly what you were from the moment you walked into my house?" His mask cracked completely. The charm vanished, replaced by the desperate rage of a con man who'd been outplayed. "You kept this from Charlotte, from your own daughter. What kind of mother does that? The kind who wanted to protect her daughter from gold-digging parasites. The kind who knew that if I told her about this warehouse, you'd have found a way to get your hands on it. The kind who's been waiting 3 years for you to reveal your true self." "You can't prove anything," he snarled. "So I broke in. Big deal. I'll pay for the lock." "You can't." The sound of police sirens cut him off. Multiple vehicles, from the sound of it. Derek's face went from gray to white. "Actually, I can prove quite a lot," I said. "Every camera in this building has been recording you since you arrived. We have footage of you cutting the lock, breaking the window, entering without permission, and attempting to steal property worth millions of dollars. That's breaking and entering, attempted grand larceny, and since the value of what you tried to take exceeds $5,000, it's a felony in this state. Police officers burst through the door Thomas had opened for them, weapons drawn. Police, don't move. He actually tried to run, sprinting toward the back of the warehouse, like he might somehow escape through the wall. 2 officers tackled him before he made it 10 feet, slamming him face first into the concrete floor. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in years. Margaret Whitmore, one of the officers asked, approaching me. That's correct, officer. You're the owner of this property? I'm the primary trustee, yes. That man, I gestured to Derek, now being hauled to his feet with blood streaming from his nose, broke in approximately 20 minutes ago and attempted to steal several items from this secured location. Ma'am, can you give us an estimate of the value of the stolen items? The painting he loaded into his truck is worth approximately $4 million. The box of what he thought were trinkets contained 6 Fabergé eggs, worth another $6 million collectively. The officer's eyes widened. $10 million? Give or take. I can provide detailed appraisals for everything he touched. Derek was screaming now, incoherent rage and panic as the magnitude of his situation hit him. A $10 million felony theft. He'd spend decades in prison. That's when Charlotte arrived. I heard her voice outside, talking to another officer, saying she was my daughter and I'd asked her to come. The officer let her through, and she stepped into the warehouse. My beautiful daughter stopped dead in the doorway, her mouth falling open exactly as Derek's had. But where Derek had seen dollar signs, Charlotte saw history, her father's legacy, her mother's secret, the protection I'd built around her for 43 years. What is all this? This, I said gently, is what your father and I built for you. This is your inheritance, Charlotte. It's been here all along, waiting for the right time. But why didn't you tell me? I glanced at Derek, who was being read his rights, while still trying to protest his innocence. Because I needed to know who you married. I needed to know if he loved you, or loved what he thought you might inherit. And Charlotte, I think we have our answer. She looked at Derek, really looked at him, seeing him cuffed and bloody, and screaming about lawyers and rights, and how this was all a setup. Then she looked around the warehouse again, at the Ferraris, and the Picassos, and the treasures her father had spent decades collecting. How much? She asked quietly. Current appraisal is approximately $43 million, I said. And it's all yours, sweetheart. The trust your father set up makes you the sole beneficiary. I was just the guardian, keeping it safe until you were ready. Tears streamed down Charlotte's face. Not tears of greed or excitement about the money, but tears of understanding. She understood now why I'd been so cautious, why I'd watched Derek so carefully, why I'd kept this secret for so long. She understood that everything I'd done had been to protect her. She crossed the warehouse floor and hugged me, holding on tight, while police officers took Derek away, still screaming threats and accusations. Thomas quietly explained to the remaining officers about the security footage and documentation we had of the break-in, and I held my daughter, feeling the weight of 43 years of secrets finally lifting. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, I murmured into her hair. No, she said, pulling back to look at me with red eyes. Don't apologize. If you'd told me, I would have told him, and he would have found a way to get to it. God, Mom, you saved me. I saved what your father built for you, I corrected. That's what parents do, Charlotte. We protect our children even when they're grown, even when it's hard, even when it takes 43 years. The aftermath was everything I'd hoped for. Derek was charged with felony breaking and entering, attempted grand larceny, and a handful of other charges the district attorney threw in for good measure. His bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't pay. He sat in county jail while the legal system ground forward. Charlotte's divorce attorney had a field day with the criminal charges. The divorce was finalized within 3 weeks, with Derek getting absolutely nothing except a criminal record and a pending trial. Charlotte received sole ownership of their house. Her trust fund remained entirely hers. And best of all, she walked away understanding exactly what she'd almost lost. But the real victory came 6 months later, at Derek's trial. I sat in the courtroom next to Charlotte, watching as the prosecutor displayed photograph after photograph of the warehouse contents. Each image showed another priceless item Derek had tried to steal. The jury's faces were studies in disbelief. The defense attorney tried to argue that Derek hadn't known the items were valuable, that he thought he was helping his mother-in-law clear out old junk. But Thomas's security footage showed Derek's face when he first entered the warehouse, showed the calculated way he selected the most obviously valuable pieces, showed him loading them into his truck with the careful handling of someone who knew exactly what he was stealing. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Derek's sentencing hearing was even better. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who clearly had no patience for con men, listened to the prosecution's recommendation of 15 years. Then she listened to Derek's attorney plead for leniency, arguing that Derek had made a mistake in judgment, that he was suffering from the stress of divorce, that he deserved a second chance. Then Charlotte stood up. My daughter, who I'd raised to see the good in everyone, who had trusted Derek completely for 3 years, who had her heart broken by his betrayals, stood in front of that courtroom and spoke. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady and clear, Derek Ashford didn't make a mistake. He made a calculated decision to steal from my family. He spent 3 years manipulating me, cheating on me, and planning how to take everything he could from my mother and me. The only thing he's sorry about is getting caught. I asked the court to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. The judge smiled, just a little. Mrs. Ashford, I think your mother raised you very well. She turned to Derek. Mr. Ashford, you attempted to steal $10 million from a woman who had every reason to trust you. You broke into private property, destroyed security measures, and showed absolutely no remorse for your actions. I hereby sentence you to 20 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for a minimum of 15 years. Derek's scream of protest was cut off as the bailiffs dragged him from the courtroom. I reached over and squeezed Charlotte's hand. She squeezed back, and we watched her ex-husband disappear into the justice system that would keep him locked away for decades. That evening, Charlotte and I returned to the warehouse together. Thomas had upgraded the security again, installing a new biometric lock that recognized both Charlotte and me. We walked through the space slowly, and I told her the story of each piece. The Ferrari her father bought at auction in '81. The Warhol he commissioned directly from the artist in '77. The first edition Superman comic he'd found at an estate sale for $3. He was building this for me, Charlotte said, running her hand along the hood of a pristine Aston Martin. All those years. He was building it for you, and your children, and their children, I confirmed. He wanted you to have security, freedom, the ability to pursue whatever dreams you had without worrying about money. And he wanted to make sure that only someone worthy would get to share it with you. Derek wasn't worthy, she said quietly. No, sweetheart, he wasn't. But you'll find someone who is. And when you do, this will still be here. Waiting, growing, protected. Charlotte looked at me with something like awe. How did you keep this secret for so long? How did you watch me marry him, knowing what he was and not say anything? Because you needed to learn, I said simply. If I just told you he was a gold digger, you wouldn't have believed me. You would have defended him, maybe even cut me out of your life to prove you trusted him. But this way, you discovered the truth yourself. You learned to trust your instincts, and you learned that the people who truly love you will protect you, even when it's hard, even when it takes decades. We stood there in the warehouse, surrounded by $43 million and 43 years of secrets, and Charlotte started to laugh. Not bitter laughter, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. Derek thought he was marrying into modest money, she said. He spent 3 years scamming for what he thought would be maybe $1 million inheritance. And all along, he was sleeping next to someone who owned all of this. Poetic justice, I agreed. So what happens now? She asked. Do I sell it? Keep it? What would Dad have wanted? Your father would have wanted you to do whatever makes you happy, I said. This is yours now, Charlotte. Every car, every painting, every bottle of wine. You can sell it all tomorrow and buy a yacht. You can keep it as an investment and let it keep growing. You can donate it to museums. You can do anything you want. That's the point of wealth. Real wealth. It gives you freedom. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, looking around the warehouse. Then she smiled, and I saw her father in that smile, saw his wisdom and his careful planning reflected in our daughter. I think I'll keep it, she said. At least most of it. Maybe sell a few pieces to fund a pediatric clinic I've been dreaming about. But the rest? I'll keep it, maintain it, add to it maybe. And someday, if I have children, I'll wait until they're ready to tell them about their grandfather's gift, their grandmother's patience, and their mother's expensive lesson about trusting the wrong people. That sounds perfect, I said. We left the warehouse together that night, Thomas setting all the security systems behind us. As we drove through the city, Charlotte reached over and took my hand. Thank you, Mom, for protecting me, for waiting, for teaching me the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn. You're welcome, sweetheart. That's what mothers do. And it was. For 43 years, I'd kept a secret. I'd watched and waited and protected my daughter from a predator she couldn't see. I'd let her marry the wrong man so she could learn to recognize the right one when he came along. I'd played the longest game imaginable. All for this moment. Derek Ashford thought he'd found easy money, and I taught him something far more valuable than anything in that warehouse. Never underestimate a mother protecting her child. Never assume the quiet old lady is naive or helpless. And never ever try to con someone who's been playing chess while you're still learning checkers. The warehouse still stands in the city center, unmarked and unremarkable from the outside. Charlotte visits it regularly now, sometimes bringing Thomas and me, sometimes going alone to walk among her father's legacy. The collection continues to grow in value. The Ferraris appreciate. The artwork becomes more iconic. The wine ages perfectly in climate-controlled darkness. And somewhere in a state prison, Derek Ashford has 15 more years to think about the $10 million he tried to steal, the $43 million he never knew existed, and the 2 women who outsmarted him so completely, he'll probably never understand exactly what happened. That's my story. That's how a grandmother, a daughter, a warehouse full of secrets, and 43 years of patience taught a gold digger the most expensive lesson of his life. I hope you enjoyed it. Now remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. And if you know anyone who needs to hear this story, anyone dealing with their own Derek Ashford, share it with them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't quick. Sometimes it's served cold, after decades of careful planning. Thanks for listening. This is Margaret Whitmore, signing off.